So what I wanted to talk about today was beginning anew, because this is the first meeting of Potluck Sangha in 2024. It's still close to the beginning of the new year. Good time to think about new beginnings. We also have a new CTC, a new caretaking council for the Sangha. And for me personally, I really feel like I'm beginning something new with the new year. My previous job has ended, and I don't have another job lined up yet. So I'm taking this month to just kind of reflect and think about what's important to me um, and rest a bit and recover. So in terms of recovery and renewal, let me share my screen. I have some pictures here. And how do I make this play? There we go. Okay, can you all see a persimmon? I took this picture last month, mid-December, in my backyard. The persimmons ripened late this year, and the leaves on the tree hung on really late, probably connected to each other and maybe connected to warmer than usual weather. And we had fewer persimmons than normal. We might have started out with the regular number of persimmons, but because they were on the tree so long, I think that gave the squirrels and birds extra time to eat them. So we only got about a half dozen persimmons that we could eat this year, maybe a little bit more. The reason I'm sharing this picture, other than the beautiful colors, is because I noticed something on the persimmon tree a few years ago, and you can see it very clearly in this picture, which is if you look closely at some of these stems, you can see that although the persimmon's leaves are already turning orange and getting ready to fall off, and the fruit is very ripe, there are already some buds, some new buds on the branches, ready for next year. And I was gobsmacked when I first noticed this. I was like, wow, this tree is already getting started setting up buds for the next season, and it's not even completely done with this season. It's just something, I think it's actually quite common in trees, it turns out, but I had never actually noticed it before. And you can see it also here. This is a plum tree in my backyard. I took this picture a couple of years ago, and if you look closely, you can see the waning moon among the branch, nestled in the branch there. The moon is about the same phase it is right now in real life. I think this is later in the year. I don't know, this is probably also December, but November, December. But this tree is later, and it's loss of leaves. It's lost almost all its leaves, but you can see lots of buds waiting for the new year, waiting for the new spring. And then I took this picture last week in Ohio. It's a pair of trees outside my parents' window at the assisted living facility where we moved them this year. We moved my parents in March from the house they'd lived in for 30 years. My mom and my stepdad, house where they'd lived for 30 years, to an assisted living home where they have an apartment. It's a one-bedroom apartment. A lot less stuff. They walk out their front door of their apartment now, and they're in a long hallway that takes them to a dining room where they can get 3 meals a day, and there's lots of activities. There are nurses who look after their well-being and bring their meds to them every morning, which is really important because they were forgetting to take their medications. all in all, they're much, much safer. And I think after adjusting, I visited them last month, a week ago, they're doing much better. They have settled in, but it has taken time. And my wife and I were talking about this, and I realized I have been to Ohio either to help them get ready to move or to help them adjust after they've moved. I've been to Ohio 6 times since September of 22, 5 times just in last year. So it's a lot of travel. But I noticed that on these buds here, or these trees here, these bare branches in the middle of Ohio winter, there's some buds. And I was thinking about this because 2023 was an exhausting year for me. In addition to going to Ohio to take care of my parents 5 times, in 23, my wife and I drove out to visit my son in residential therapy in Roseville about a dozen times, 3 or 4 hour trip. And actually, some weekends I made that trip twice because we picked him up, took him back to San Mateo, spent a couple days, and then on Sunday I drove him back and then came back home. So it was well over a dozen back and forth trips to Roseville. He was having a really hard time at the beginning of the year. He's doing much, much better now, thanks in part to that residential therapy. My wife's illness has continued. Karen's illness continued through much of the year, making her unable to function normally for a lot of the year, suffering from vertigo and other things. It basically kept her bedridden for a lot of the year. And I fell on my bike and dislocated my shoulder at one point too. So there was a lot. There was a lot in 2023. So I felt very scorched by the end of the year. And I think that I wasn't fired, I was laid off, but I think that they made it clear that I wasn't doing things quite the way they liked at my office, and that was why I was being laid off. And I suspect that if I had not, well, maybe I had many, many things to do for my family and for myself. And I think that reduced my focus on my job and probably contributed to why things didn't work out there. But that's okay, because I'm actually happy to have moved on from that. So now I'm going to show you a picture of a sprouting bud. And this is one of my favorite pictures of 2023. I did not take this. This came from a San Francisco Chronicle story from last month. And it's a picture of a burned redwood tree in Big Basin, which has sprouted a new little branch out of a bud. And the Chronicle story talked about a scientific research paper that had been done recently. They looked at the redwoods in Big Basin, which was absolutely burned to a crisp. And many of these trees had lost all their branches and all their needles, all their leaves. But they have started to sprout recently out of this black and charred bark. These little sprouts are coming out. Here's another picture of one. A little sprout coming out. And there are so many sprouts on so many of these redwood trees that in some places people say that it looks like a forest of green pipe cleaners, because the trees are just like these vertical trunks and they've got all these fuzzy little green sprouts coming out of them. This is not the Big Basin that people have known and loved for many decades. It doesn't probably look pretty to a lot of people, but it looks absolutely beautiful to me because the redwoods are demonstrating a kind of resilience here that is really remarkable. It's remarkable among trees. Honestly, there are not many trees who have this much resilience to fire. But I think it might have a lesson for us too. Um, there was a piece published recently by Deer Park called the Redwood Sutra, which I highly recommend you look up if you haven't. And it talks about the many ways in which redwood trees are models for practitioners in sanghas. And I think mostly monastic sanghas it was talking about, but applicable to lay sanghas too. And it talks about the ways that redwood trees interlock their roots together and provide shade for the little trees until the trees are able to grow up strong and become big, mighty redwoods themselves, and many other features. And it didn't talk about these little buds, but I think that the Redwood Sutra could include on its list of virtues of redwood trees these buds. So I was so excited about this that I went and I read the research paper that it's based on. And it turns out that these sprouts, you can see in the upper left here, there's a sprout coming out of a bud. And this is on a branch that they found lying on the ground. That bud was actually formed in the picture, that picture A on the left. That bud was formed over 100 years ago. When the branch was a tiny little twig, the bud was formed. And that little bud trace, that track going up towards the middle, is shows how the bud stayed near the surface of the tree as the tree grew, or as that branch grew. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. So the inner core, the heartwood, grew, but the bud just stayed on the surface just under the bark for over 100 years. The picture on the right shows a close-up of another bud trace. And that picture on the upper right is a detail of the picture on the bottom, which shows a bud trace that goes back 600 years. So these scientists did studies and they found that these buds that are sprouting on the redwood trees some of them formed hundreds of years ago. Not just the winter before they sprouted, but hundreds of years ago, these trees were forming buds that are only now sprouting. And what's more, these trees don't have leaves, remember, until these buds sprouted. So they didn't have the ability to photosynthesize, but the trees have stored energy in the form of sugars that are stored in the roots and trunks of the tree. And when they analyzed these sprouts that were sprouting, they could tell by carbon dating how old that sugar was. And they found that on average, the sugars that were feeding the new sprouts were 20 years old. Some of the sugars that were feeding the sprouts might have been 50 years old. So you have 600-year-old buds being fed by sugar that was formed by photosynthesis 50 years ago. And this enables the tree, when all its branches are burned off and it's burned to a crisp, these reserves of energy in these ancient buds enable the tree to sprout again. And if you look at a redwood tree like this, or redwood trees that are burned and there are little sprouts down at the base, you can see that those are just new sprouts of the same old tree. But these ones at the base, over time, if they grow up and become big trees, they're going to look like daughter trees of the mother tree or child trees of the parent tree. It's going to look like there was a tree that burned down and then new trees grew up in a ring around it. But that's just an illusion. It's actually the same tree. Has just sprouted new buds, which are going to become, maybe, if conditions are right, new trunks. So when we think about, I'm just about out of time, but here's my point. When we think about beginning anew, One of the things I learned about beginning anew from Lennis, who mentored me patiently for almost 3 years and continues to be a inspiration and guiding light for me. One of the things I learned from her is that beginning anew is very easy. It can be done frequently. I hope you don't mind, Lennis, if I say Lennis, she will begin anew at the drop of a hat. We might be laughing about something, and then she will follow up with me the next day and water my flowers and express regret in case I misunderstood something she said. And it's often a case where I didn't even notice that there was something I might be upset by. But she taught me by that it's very easy to begin anew. And the more you do it, the more flowers you water in the other person, the fresher the relationship can be. So there's a book which she gave me called Beginning Anew by Sister Chan Kong. And if you want to learn about all the details of beginning anew, flower watering, expressing regret, checking in, expressing hurts, you can follow all those steps. But the point about beginning anew that I wanted to make today, and I am wrapping up, I promise, is that you can water your own flowers. Beginning anew is, in fact, it says in this book, it's important to start with yourself. To water your own flowers or to nourish your own buds, you need to have some reserves, some stored energy. You need to have some buds. I feel confident that because of our practice, because of my practice, I have those. I think as a Sangha, we have them. But I also think it's important, it's useful, it's skillful to think as you go through life, am I storing up some reserves of energy for the future? Am I creating new buds or new seeds that might sprout in the future? And how can I create and protect and store those seeds or those buds for the long term so that they'll be ready in case they're needed to sprout anew? And I think we can apply this way of thinking to ourselves, our own practice, but also to our sanghas. And it seems like, to me, this is a good time of year to think about new buds and whether we're nourishing the new buds in ourselves and our sanghas. Thank you, dear Sangha. I think that's all I have. There we go. A forest of pipe cleaners. All right, that's all I have. I'm going to stop sharing now.